okay, you have like tons of needs. How can we build stories and how can we piece these things together to kind of hit that sweet spot in that Venn diagram?
Funnel Visionaries. Welcome to the very first episode of Funnel Visionaries, where we talk a whole lot of realness about the customer journey. I'm your host, Konrad Sanders, CEO of the Creative Copywriter. I am super stoked to kick things off with my old friend, Shelby Blitz, the Director of Content at the rapidly growing HR tech scale-up HiBob. And in today's episode, we talk about how bloody cringing those LinkedIn sub stories are. But more importantly, we delve into how to piece together the puzzle of a people-first content strategy. So let's dive in. All right. Hello and welcome, Shelby, to not only the first season, but the very first episode of our podcast, Funnel Visionaries, real talk on perfecting the customer journey. How are you doing? How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me. It's an honor. We've known each other for a long time, and I'm so happy to be, the first person on this podcast. It's awesome.
We're old pals. We're old buddies.
Yeah.
And because this is the first episode, I guess the success of the entire podcast is reliant on how this conversation goes.
No pressure. No pressure.
Exactly.
It's all good.
No pressure at all. But it's all falls on your shoulders here.
Yeah. We got this. It's going to be good.
We got this. We're going to nail it. I thought you'd be a brilliant first guest. As we said, we're old pals. And you're a serial client of ours and just doing fantastic things as director of content at HiBob. A SaaS scale up that seems to be going from strength to strength.
Thank you.
Probably largely thanks to those, that content marketing success.
That's all that it is. No, I think
just that, only that,
just
purely down to you.
That's it. No, of course not. There's many, many wonderful things at HiBob, but I think content is a huge part of that. I just actually had a conversation with someone. We're doing planning for next quarter. Someone who runs our ABX program, and he said, like, your content is the fuel for our programs. It's so important. We need it. We need more of it. So that,
awesome.
It is true that it's fueling a lot.
There you go. And if you need more of it, well, we're here. We're here for you. To call. So before we dive into like the serious marketing chat, real serious stuff, we like to start with a little light and fun part, a bit of marketing silliness, if you will. And we call this bit, what really spams my sanity? So the first kind of short question is, Shelby, what's your kind of marketing pet peeve at the moment? What really spams your sanity?
Okay. I thought a bit about this, and the one thing, it's not even just right now that it spams my sanity, it always has spammed my sanity, is when content is always gated, when you can't read anything without having to give your email or your information. I know that's like controversial, there's many schools of thought on this, and certainly there's a time and a place for gating content, so I totally understand the need for it, but gosh, it really drives me mad when you can't read like a single paragraph of educational content without having to give something to the corporation to read it.
Absolutely. Can I amplify that slightly and say, when they do that and they also ask for like a million things on that contact form, it's like, no.
You fill out one and then another one pops up. And you fill out, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to give up. Yeah.
And that's it. A lot of people, I don't know, more people will be giving up because of that friction, right, that you're creating there.
Yeah.
But no, absolutely, I agree with you. It's like content marketing in its very nature should be about offering selfless value, while at the same time, as we know, gating some things because we do want to get marketing qualified leads, right? We do 100%. Want to get those contactable leads.
Yeah, I think, like I said, there's a time and a place for it, and there's a strategy behind it. Like, when you should and shouldn't gate something, and what kind of content should you gate versus what content should always be kind of free, quote unquote. But gosh, when when you just are immediately hit with, give me your email, give me your phone number, give me your blood type. I mean, it really drives me
Exactly.
crazy.
All right, so people stop trying to get all of Shelby's contact details. Offer her some
Yeah,
selfless
that's
value. All right,
yeah,
she's more
that's
likely to engage with your brand that way. That's
yeah,
our lesson learned
exactly,
from that
100%.
bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. So can we let's talk a bit about your journey. So if you can
Sure.
kind of give the context, right? Your journey as a content marketing expert. How you ended up embracing a people first strategy, a HiBob people first content strategy. I know that's something you wanted to focus on here at HiBob. So tell me a bit about your journey as a content marketer.
Sure. Well, I'll take you even before I became a content marketer. I studied journalism and professional writing at university and actually started working as a music journalist and kind of a lifestyle journalist for some independent magazines, also Time Out Chicago, which is not an independent magazine at all.
Yeah.
And kind of like my attraction to that was that I love talking about people and learning about people and hearing people's stories and being able to then tell those stories. I kind of, I don't know, quickly, but I learned that I also had to make a living and support myself.
It's
And
important in
eventually,
life.
yeah, I guess. And eventually I transitioned into tech and content within tech, which I didn't even really know was a thing, like this was in 2010, not to date myself, but this was in 2010. And I got a job kind of randomly in an editorial department at Groupon back in the day. And I
Yeah.
was like, wow, this is like a thing. There's like editorial departments in like tech companies, huh? And there at the time, it was a very like goofy, creative brand. And I was like, oh, well, this like matches these two things that I love, which is like creativity and people, plus like a paycheck and,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. A roof over your head.
yeah, those are important.
Food
It's
on the
important,
table.
you know?
Yeah.
And so that kind of is where I realized like, oh, this is like, I think this is a career and writing is my passion. So cool. And it just kind of moved on from there, like
Yeah.
I then worked in a really, really tiny kind of medical device startup, which was really focused on telling the story of the nurses and the doctors who were using this medical device, and so interesting. And worked in data analytics companies, which can be a bit dry because you're talking about data. But I think what I learned from that was like, well, how can we take this data and talk about people through it, or tell
Yeah.
stories that are focused on people through data and take a different angle? I just kind of kept evolving from there. And now
Yeah.
I'm at HiBob, which is a very people focused organization. We're an HR platform. We are like squarely focused on people first in everything that we do. And
Yeah.
so the stories just kind of naturally happen.
Yeah.
And I feel so lucky because it's so interesting. It's like conversations about the world of work, which affects all of us, and the workplace and hybrid work and remote work. And I started there right at the tail end of the pandemic where everything changed in the world of work. So there's so many stories to be told. And I just think that people connect with stories about people. And
Yeah.
so like this
Peop-
for me is the best combination.
and there's a bit of a cliche, but perhaps accurate one. People buy from people, right? Like
Also, yeah, 100%.
that's why we want to tell stories and to connect on that kind of personal level, and why even when it comes to copywriting and content, you want to make it feel conversational, right? So that the reader feels like they're in a conversation with an individual, with a person, essentially.
100%.
When did this might not be interesting for our listeners at all, but when did our paths cross? I'm trying to. It was data analytics, right?
It was, yeah. Our paths crossed 3 companies ago for me. Yeah, 3 companies
Was it
ago.
Sisense?
Sisense,
It
yeah,
was
data
Sisense.
analytics. I
And then
think I didn't
Explorium.
bring you there. Someone brought you there, and
Yeah,
then kind of I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then we kind of worked on a bunch of different things. I think we even did a few videos together at the time.
we
It was like,
did. Yeah,
try
really
this.
creative stuff. That was cool.
Yeah. And then I brought you to the next place, which was a data science company. And now, of
Yeah,
course, at HiBob, which,
HiBob. Just
you know,
bringing us everywhere you go, and we appreciate. Yeah, of
well, I
course,
mean,
we appreciate you for it.
goes without saying. Same.
Yeah. So let's talk about people first. Like, obviously, it's been a central theme in your journey, in your personal journey, right? Which is really interesting to hear. And I think that by the sounds of it, like when it comes to building a content strategy, you really want it to be a people first content strategy. What exactly does that mean to you?
I think it means, well, first of all, what you said before, which is that people like buying from people, as cliche as
Mm,
that sounds. And I think we have to communicate as if we're talking to a person on the other end, and not that, just writing for the machine of Google.
yeah,
We really have to, like, there's someone on the end who hopefully is going to read this. So number one, it's the strategy for me is about how do we speak and the tone of voice and, you know, the word choices that we make. But on top of that, like something I kind of always am reiterating to my team and to myself when I'm writing stuff is providing value. I think
yeah,
like we're not just writing to write. We need to be giving valuable information, something that, like, no matter if they're a customer, if they're a prospect, if they're quite frankly never going to buy us, but they're an HR person, we want to give them a piece of information, something food for thought that they can take and they can start thinking about how they can implement it right now. Um,
yeah.
because otherwise, I'm not sure what someone will get out of just, here's why this thing matters. Like we want to
Mm.
provide people with something to walk away with and find useful.
Otherwise, what's the point, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of content for content's sake, which you see so. I mean, the internet is sort of saturated and full of all of that kind of crappy content.
Yeah.
You mentioned SEO there, and I'd love to kind of show I suppose the contrast between a full SEO content strategy, which again a lot of companies take, and I've always been an advocate for including SEO as part of your content strategy, but that part of being the operative kind of phrase there. And one thing I often say, a Conradism, is that SEO is, kind of a byproduct of good content marketing. It shouldn't be your main goal. And you kind of alluded to it there. You're not writing for the search engine. That's a consideration. But if you create a full content strategy around that, then you're going to miss probably many tricks. So do you
Yeah.
want to speak to that a bit? Like, what do you see as the difference between full
Totally.
on SEO content strategy or people first, which also incorporates SEO?
Yeah, I think like SEO is a requirement in any single thing that we write. I like to talk about how we tell the stories that we tell in 3 different ways. So one is stories that are what is someone searching for right now. So that's really SEO driven content
Yeah.
because it's like, okay, what keywords are we seeing that we need to be monopolizing on? And let's write a story that uses
Yeah.
that. But that's not to say we're just regurgitating information and keyword stuffing and just trying to, like, get something out. I still require, and my team as well, that there is information there, that there is a story there, that there's value there. So
Mm.
sometimes it takes a little bit longer than it would if we were just like, all right, tap, 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 we'll get something out, send it,
Yeah.
that's it. But I think what I see is that we get a lot more value, and people get a lot more value out of this type of content because they're actually learning something, rather than just like, I don't know. I think we've all had this experience where you Google something and you go to a site and you're like, this taught me nothing. Like, I knew this part of it. Like, I needed something deeper. I needed more.
Yeah.
And so we really try and avoid that. But that is one aspect of our content strategy. Then we have the second aspect, which is stories about what we want people to be looking for, like what we want to own. And SEO plays a role in that my team typically develops those briefs, and then SEO fills in or inputs into those briefs rather than it being driven by the keyword.
Yeah.
And that, I think, for me, is like the ideal scenario, right? Because it's both of these things. We're getting SEO value and we're getting kind of like what the story is that we want to be telling as a brand and that we believe our audience wants to read and learn about. And then the third, which also is SEO related for us anyway, is this kind of world of work stories. They're like these much bigger pieces, thought leadership pieces, which again, SEO kind of feeds into, but they're much more like future looking pieces. And so very kind of opposite side of the spectrum from those, like, what are people looking for right now? But SEO is a part of the whole strategy. It's just a matter of like, is it SEO directed or is it SEO kind of input into the brief? Those are the two.
So the kind of categories 2 and 3 there. In terms of the ideating, it's led not by the keyword. It's you're coming up with the ideas. I imagine they're sort of based on things that you want to say as a brand, and also maybe target prospect sort of pain points and desires and things like that. Beyond just, we found a kind of keyword gap, let's use that in the title. But once you've come up with the ideas, then you try and you'll find any opportunities to make it more SEO'd, essentially, that content.
Yeah, and I think also one part of that is the optimization of content that's already been published. So like maybe there's a piece of content, a blog post that might have fallen in that second column and it's published, and I don't know, 6 months later, our SEO person will come to us and say like, oh, I see how we can even make this better, and maybe we can add a couple more sections to it. Or, like there is also the optimization part of old content. So the journey kind of never stops, I think, like whether it was like SEO led or kind of brand narrative led or whatever it might be, like the SEO factor is always kind of around, playing a role.
And as you said, like often low-hanging fruit when it comes to SEO content is optimizing old posts, right? Seeing what's no longer performing as well, refreshing it, literally sometimes just tweaking the content here and there so Google knows it's fresh. Plays a huge role, makes a massive difference. But it sounds great, and probably one of the reasons for HiBob's success is, to me, it sounds like you've got a good collaboration between sort of departments and specialists within the company. And one thing that I found from working with many different clients and companies of all different sizes, often like, especially the larger corporates, to be honest, they get to a certain size and things get so siloed, and it's almost like a tug of war. There's like the SEO department going, no, we must create a content strategy just based on keywords. And what I find, which is kind of what we've been saying, is that when a content strategy is just SEO led by an SEO department, they tend to go quite narrow, even in their keyword exploration, because they tend to, the first thoughts are like, what's our product or service? How do we find what keywords are related to it semantically? And they go down that route. Whereas if you build a content strategy much more around the people, their desires, their pain points, things like that, and kind of other messaging and content buckets that we want to be putting out there, and then sort of retroactively work that SEO factor in, you're just more likely to create like a much broader mix of content that will be catching traffic and target prospects all over the place, rather than that kind of real narrow, product focused keywords. Of course, we want those too, because it's kind of the low hanging fruit.
Right.
As you said, that's kind of category one for you. Like, you naturally want to capture that demand, but it sounds like, would you say I'm accurate in saying that there's a good collaboration between sort of departments in
I think so.
HiBob?
Yeah. I mean, listen, like, it's never easy and it's always a work in progress, but I will say I'm very lucky in that our SEO lead really understands and believes in the power of good content and not just writing for writing's sake.
Yeah.
So he's really supportive of kind of making sure that it's content that tells a story, that is in our tone of voice, that is offering value and isn't just regurgitating information that everyone else is saying already. So, ups and downs, it's never perfect, but I think we do work really well together because we understand the need for both sides. He understands the need for the work that my team does. I understand, and my team understands the work that, he does and how it brings value to the content that we write. So there is a nice relationship there. But in the beginning, it was more difficult. I will be completely honest with you. Like, we had to get to that point where it's like, this is we're on the same team here. Like this, we're both going to win from this strategy.
One thing I talk about a lot is balance, and it kind of everything in life needs balance, right? And it's same with, we've got our 13 lenses methodology, which is really just about getting the balance right. You're creating content, and SEO is one of those lenses, and then there's like real talk, and it's about kind of not going too far down any one rabbit hole, because then you're missing all the rest of that mix that you want to gain. And I think HiBob does a brilliant job of getting that balance right across these different sort of focus areas. So we touched on kind of ideating there, right? And the idea of really providing value. And we've mentioned that at the beginning of this episode as well, that selfless value, which is kind of key to content marketing that is successful. Can you kind of walk us through you in your and HiBob's process for coming up with content ideas that educate and engage people, I suppose at any point in their customer journey? Because we're, the podcast is all about customer journeys, and we're focusing on like being people first. So how do you go through that process of coming up with those content ideas that will push them down the funnel?
Yeah. Gosh, I could talk about this forever. So I will,
please.
You're like, please keep going.
Please keep going. Yeah, we'll make it a 3-hour episode.
Right. First one, 3 hours. So, I lead a quarterly planning process for our evergreen content. So that's content that's not necessarily for like a global campaign. For example, it's like our kind of always on library that encompasses those three kind of buckets that I mentioned before. And that process is basically how my team puts together our strategy. So I meet with a bunch of different stakeholders across the business. So product marketing, performance marketing, SEO, of course, our customer marketing lead, all the regional marketing managers. We have a whole bunch of those. Like I meet with, I like to say, everyone and their mother to get kind of like, they prep for these meetings. What's happening in your region? What's going to be happening in the product? What are you seeing in search? What's performing really well in ABX? What are the keywords that we should be focusing on there? I get like all of this information, like an info dump on a quarterly basis. And we're actually doing this process right now. And then that's all kind of organized in a deck that my team gets. And then my team has like a week or so to kind of look at that and see like, okay, where can we meet a couple of business needs with one piece of content? And how can we, there's only a limited number of hours. We're limited people. We do have, obviously, TCC to help us, but we're still limited.
Yeah.
And how can we meet as many business needs as possible with what we have in hours and resources? And then we do a pitch meeting. So we have a pitch meeting, my team, where we everyone comes to the table with their ideas of, hey, this would be interesting for what we call an L100 piece of content. That's like very thought leadership, top of the funnel. This is kind of like a matrix of how we classify things. And then if we do that, then maybe we can do what we call L300, which would be like bottom of the funnel, to support that, because we can do XYZ in the product. And we have this like hour-long meeting where we kind of talk, go back and forth, all that stuff. And then all that information, those ideas are taken and kind of plotted out onto a quarterly calendar. Here's what we think we can do and what we think we can produce. And then it's shared back to all those stakeholders for what I call a red flag review. So they can say, like, hey, you missed this thing that I mentioned that actually like I must have because sales needs it this quarter. Or, oh, can you like maybe hold on that piece because we actually have something coming out in the product in Q1 that we should actually just talk about it then. Or, just any sort of things that seem like, I don't know. And once that's approved, then we go into production and we go into brief writing, briefs that get sent to your team, briefs that we work on internally and all that fun stuff. And we go from there. And I think a big part of that process is really just like understanding the needs of the business and then thinking, how can we meet that need, but tell the story in a way that is interesting and that is differentiating from how our competitors are talking about this, or maybe they're not talking about it at all. Then cool. And how can we do this in a way that isn't, again, like, there's a new policy coming out. Here's what the policy is, like, what's the takeaway? So a lot of the briefing part actually requires a lot of research, and it requires talking to our own HR teams. We're really lucky that we're an HR company. We obviously have our own people and culture team. And so they feed into a lot of this stuff. Like, how would you approach this? Or what are you doing about this? We also talk to our community. We have a really active community of Bob customers, and they love to contribute and chime in on stuff. So one of the content managers on my team will go in there and say, like, hey, we're thinking about writing these 3 topics. What do you think about them? Is anyone interested? Does anyone have a point of view? Want to even write it themselves? Like, we try and engage as many people in the process as possible, because we also then get different voices, different points of view, and different things that we can then offer our readers that maybe they wouldn't have thought about, maybe we wouldn't have thought about if we hadn't talked to different people. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying it's really about talking to people internally, externally, and taking all of that information and trying to turn it into interesting stories, helpful stories, educational stories.
It sounds very robust. It sounds
it is.
But like, I love the short, sweet summary at the end of like, it's about talking to people, because that really aligns with the theme of this episode, which is, building a people first content strategy. And it means you're kind of practicing what you preach. And I've got like about 7 questions which jumped into my head throughout there. I'm like, which way do I go? I think like it sounds almost like if there were a Venn diagram to be drawn, it might be too complex, but it's again getting that balance right, that sweet spot in the middle of like balancing the business needs and stakeholder needs within the company and actual, I suppose their actual expertise and knowledge and things that are happening and trends. while also making sure that it's, feasible, achievable, something that you can do, while also making sure it's different, so
Mhm.
unique, not what every other sort of HR brand and their mother are kind of putting out there, but also naturally making sure it's super relevant and valuable to your target audience. And you've
Yeah.
essentially got your you've got your target buyers in house, right? You've got that's a great resource of not
Totally.
every not every company has that. In fact, many don't, and many don't really try to do that buyer research. I think that's something that's often missed is, you know, the kind of, like, I call it inside out approach, just marketers going, I think this is going to be a good idea. Let me chuck it out there and throw loads of money into it, when they're not their target audience. They're usually a sample of 1 or 10 or however many there are in the marketing team. So it's really nice that you have that in house, but at the same time, it's talking to lots of people who have slightly different agendas, and then kind of getting that balance right, hitting that sweet spot in the middle of that massive Venn diagram.
Yeah, I think of it as a puzzle, and I really like that's something that I really love about my job is this like, okay, you have like tons of needs. How can we build stories and how can we piece these things
Mm,
together to kind of hit that sweet spot in that Venn diagram? Like sometimes we miss, sometimes we only hit a couple, and sometimes we only hit one, or like
yeah,
it's never perfect. But I think the thing that I love is trying to like put those pieces together and
yeah,
then seeing how like pumped people are when they're like, wow, that is exactly what I wanted, or that's
yeah,
perfect. I needed that piece of content to follow up from this webinar or from an event, or like the kind of jigsaw puzzle of it all, I guess, is
yeah.
is I mean, there's a lot of things that I love, but that is
It's
really something I love about it. Is like trying to take, I mean, everyone's needs and wants and desires, and then
yeah,
saying, okay, what's
fulfilling all of them.
yeah, always no, no, often letting people down, but like
Yeah,
for a reason, like prioritizing and trying to say like, what does the business really need and what does the brand need and how can we put this all together and make as many people happy as possible.
yeah.
So
No,
easy.
that's great. And I think that by the sounds of it, there's obviously quite a good. I'm bigging up HiBob a lot here. It sounds like quite a good culture of, let's say, understanding of what you guys are doing with content marketing, and and I say that because, as I said, like, we work a lot with SaaS scale ups. We also work with big corporates, sometimes in more traditional sectors where it can be trickier, right? There's just not this understanding of what content marketing is, this selfless value, the fact that you can be conversational and should be to engage prospects, and sometimes a bit of pushback from stakeholders internally. Why are we putting that out on our blog? Why are we doing it? We should just be, putting press releases out on our blog. And so, would you say generally there's a good understanding, or is part of your job re-emphasizing, explaining, kind of selling it in, and constantly trying to manage that internal communication as well to get people on board with
There's
what you're doing?
definitely a component of my job specifically, which is explaining why, like
Yeah,
why did we make the choices we made. That's the reason why, by the way, I do that kind of red flag review at the end of the process, is because I want everyone who contributed to the process to be like, thumbs up, I get this, you know,
yeah,
I'm on board. But our content isn't just for those folks, right? It's for people from every department in the organization, use it for different things, whether that's like posting on social or our CS team and kind of emails with customers, or our sales team, of course, and things that they send out to prospects. So there is a big part of it. For a while, I led a monthly meeting with 100 plus people in which I kind of said, hey, here's 5 new pieces of content we just published. Here's the funnel stage. Here's the buyer persona. Here's the key takeaways from it. here's where you can find it. Here's why you should use it. Like, and then I went over, here's 5 best performing pieces of content from the last month. Here's the buyer persona. Here's the key takeaways. Here's how it performed. And here's what's coming up. So I had this like meeting that I would run, so that it was mostly sales folks on that meeting, so that they could understand what this content was and how they could use it, you know?
Yeah.
Or turning that into an LMS course. So we have an internal learning management system, and I'm actually turning that into a course now, a monthly course that everyone in the company can use, of course, but that certain departments in the company will be required to take on a monthly basis. Their managers will be able to see that they completed it, so that they have kind of a deeper understanding of what's the latest stuff, what's performing well, how can I use this? Because that is, we can write as much as we want, but if it's not being used, that is, you know, a major problem, to put it lightly. So I think big part, like, while I think a lot of people do understand like content is important, I think it's sometimes difficult for them to know, okay, but how should I use it? How can I use it? Who is it for? And we also churn out a lot of content. Churn is maybe not my favorite word. We publish a lot, because we're not like a machine or anything, but we publish a lot of content. So they have a lot of stuff to choose from, you know, which is a wonderful thing. But I think it can also be overwhelming. And okay, well, what is the best piece for me to use? So that's one of the ways that I try and make it easier for people. But yeah, it's
which is
part of it.
Which is crucial as a, you know, very content driven company. And I think it's great you're doing that. You know, often you hear stories of sales and marketing butting heads. We've certainly, again, you know, worked with companies where that's sort of the case. Again, more so on the sort of traditional corporate side of things. And in one case, we actually more than once, we helped to create internal comms to send out to the salespeople to try and solve that same challenge that you're doing in a very kind of sophisticated way, which is having lots of conversations, a red flag sort of review, training, all of these kind of things. But we, as an agency, we just essentially wanted the content to succeed. And one way for it to succeed is to have the salespeople using it, you know? Employee advocacy, knowing how to use that. You don't just have to kind of pester people, prospects, and say, have you made a decision yet? You can use content and offer value, and it's more likely to position them as authorities. It's good for their LinkedIn profiles, etc.
Totally.
So I wrote a note down of something you mentioned. If we can deep dive slightly on it, it's the L100 and the L300. Because you started talking about you know, top funnel and bottom funnel, and then you also talked about what I coined the term AFFU, after funnel, which is your community. So you've got all of these areas covered. Can I ask, like, when it comes to the ideation, and you mentioned there, you know, we're creating a piece. Obviously, it's got to be in that sweet spot of the Venn diagram. And we're thinking of something that's more top funnel, but that's connected to a bottom funnel piece, which, you know, would, I suppose, be something that's more product focused, more salesy, so to speak. How do you connect those dots? Is there a way of doing that? Is there a grid or something? Do you always want to have some kind of mid and bottom funnel pieces linked to from that top funnel? Do you kind of look through that journey, that funnel, and kind of and how does that all work? How does that all play out?
So we have L100, L200, L300 level content. So L100 is like thought leadership, purely like not offering any sort of solution, just kind of the state of hiring, for example. You know, this is what's going on in 2024 in hiring. Then L200 goes into solution. So it starts offering like hey, here's what you could do to deal with some of these hiring challenges, for example. Not related to our product, not related to any of our, what we want to buy. I mean, of course, there is behind it messaging and storytelling that will feed into ultimately the L300 level, which is like what the HiBob level. And that's where we tell our product story and how our product then helps solve that problem that you read about in L100, the solution that, oh, maybe that is what I should do, but I don't have the thing to do it with in L200. And oh, here's the thing to do it with in L300.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about the content that we're writing in our evergreen content, we, first of all, some of the stakeholders who input will say, like, we're missing an L300 on this thing, and we really need it because we're running a always on campaign and we need a piece of content to put there. Great, that we got that. Other times it is a little bit more of a like, my team has a very clear view on all of the content that we've published. We also have a very intense audit spreadsheet where everything is listed by type, persona, topic, level, stage. And we can kind of see, oh, hey, there is a gap here. And we want to make sure that we always have a full funnel journey for anything that we write about. It's not always perfect, but we want to make sure, like, hey, if we're talking at the L100 level about employee experience, that we can also talk about employee experience from an L200 level and, of course, an L300 level. We don't want to be talking about something that our product ultimately can't support, because then we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice. So we try and think about it like that. We also, generally speaking, have, I think, like 13 topics that we talk about. And so that also helps us kind of look and see, like, okay, in the topic of D&I, the last thing we published was an L100 and L200. We haven't published L300 about how Bob supports D&I. So we should probably either refresh something old that we have or write something new. So that, I didn't mention that as part of the process, but that is also kind of part of the process, is just looking for where we have gaps in our library and trying to
part
fill
of that big puzzle that you have to put to get together. Yeah, that's great. And I think, again, this podcast is all about the customer journey and funnels, hence the name, right?
Exactly.
Funnel Visionaries. And that's exactly how content marketing should be done, and I think, again, so many companies just throw content at the wall and see what sticks, and are not thinking about pieces that address those different stages of the customer journey, from kind of problem aware, solution aware, brand aware. In my mind, they kind of marry up to your L300, 200, 100, and then you've got that, what I call truth aware, like actual customers. You've got a whole community for it, which is genius, really. And I think community marketing is proving itself to be very, very valuable. And in my opinion, it's whether it's community marketing or just something else you're doing to nurture current customers, again, I feel is often not looked at by marketers, because marketers sometimes, I believe, have the wrong end goal in place. And their end goal is like, if it's just leads, then it really should be revenue, right? They're all, sales and marketing, it should all be about driving revenue. And one of the three main ways to kind of drive revenue is to maximize customer lifetime value. So having community, nurturing them, upselling, cross-selling, turning them into referral partners, using them for feedback, like, that's just brilliant. Like, there's so much you can mine from that from that community, that to give you value and to drive more revenue and create more content that really works for other people like them.
Yeah, I think our customer marketing team does an incredible job of like nurturing these customers and engaging with them. And I think we're very lucky in that, not to like, it's a humble brag, but our customers really love our platform, and they really love what it does for them. And so they're very happy to engage in our community, talk to one another, join kind of customer only events and webinars. And like I mentioned earlier, they love and want to contribute to our content. And that is like the dream, because first of all, it makes our job easier in a way, but it also adds, again, a different voice, a different perspective, more people being able to share their amazing ideas. And our customers are really forward thinking in this space and really modern in this space and have a lot of really great ideas. So it's incredible that not only do we get to leverage those ideas and those thoughts, but also we get to like celebrate them and put them on our website and put them on our social media and say, like, look at the amazing stuff they're doing, or read about, this cool policy that they put in place in their company. And it just kind of elevates the brand. It elevates the customer and the amazing work that they're doing. And again, just brings it all back to that like people first story that is so important.
People first and value, right? I feel like that's the other word that keeps cropping up. Even in terms of them in a community can provide value to each other. It's just this big value sharing place. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask, I'm seeing how much I'm going to squeeze into the next 7 minutes. Just because you touched on like performance and results, and that's naturally something that's important to content marketers and companies. What do you analyze in terms of like the data? How do you kind of understand whether your people first content strategy or specific content or specific campaign is performing and is kind of hitting the numbers that you want to hit? What kind of numbers do you look at?
Yeah, so we look at things like time on page. That's personally for me, that's like my favorite thing to see, because like some of our content is long, like 10-minute reads, 12-minute reads, some of our guides. And we're seeing numbers that show that people are actually reading for 10 or 12 minutes, which is like unheard of, honestly. Like I've never had that. I've not really had that experience in previous companies. So time on page is awesome. Read rate goes along with that. We're also looking at, of course, like sessions and new users, like proceed rate. Are they going on to another page? And for that one specifically, like different pieces of content are supposed to do different things, right? So like if a read rate is low on something like, I don't know, the most thought leadership piece of content we have, I'm not so worried about it, right? If they're reading it and they're spending time on it, but they're ultimately not maybe clicking to the next thing, I'm kind of like, well, they see value here because they spent 10 minutes reading this thing. So hopefully they'll come back, and we'll see that in our kind of in the data.
Yeah.
But if I'm seeing a low proceed rate in like an L200 or a solution where we're then trying to say, hey, click here and you'll see how we can do that for you, then I'm like, okay, this isn't working. Why isn't this working? So like my kind of viewpoint is that different pieces of content are meant to do different things. So they should be looked at with different lenses, depending on how they're used and what their purpose is. The data is amazing, don't get me wrong, but I think my personal like favorite feedback is hearing from customers, that piece of content really helped me. That was really amazing. I love what you're doing. Hearing from
that kind of qualitative feedback is really important too, not just like the metrics.
Even from people who aren't our customers. I know like a couple of content managers on my team have gotten like LinkedIn messages from people who just have been reading our blog and see their name on it and message them like, wow, that's awesome. I have a follow-up question. Can you, engaging with the people on the team. So shout out to my team because they're amazing. But like And that is like, okay, we're having an impact because people are learning something and they want to know more about it, and they're happy to like reach out to people and engage, and like, so that for me is like the best kind of feedback that we can get.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the data is important, of course, but hearing from people that we've helped them or they've learned something, or just generally like that when they have a question, they come to our resource center to look for something. It's like, okay, we're doing something right here. And like, that's my kind of North Star.
I think it's great to have that as that kind of qualitative piece. I think especially with the fact that as much as we're trying to, well, on the subject of funnels, we naturally want everyone to click through and follow that journey that we've crafted. I think we all know the reality is the customer journey is more complex, and there's like the dark funnel. There's someone who's gone on and Googled something because their colleague read a post, right? And we can't track that. And if we're too bogged down in just that hard kind of data, the metrics, the numbers, we might miss something by going, oh, we in terms of attribution, it's all SEO, but actually the reality is, people jump in and out, and so I think it's you need to merge that with the qualitative feedback and the fact that you're giving that value that we mentioned, and people are feeding back and saying, this was really valuable, can I learn more? It means you're doing your job. Hopefully we're doing our job well as well. We're together with you and engaging prospects, giving them value and kind of ticking all the boxes that we want to tick, hopefully pleasing as many of like the various stakeholders and people involved. Awesome. All right, Shelby, we're almost come to an end. I'm wondering if I can ask you like one question, which is the final fun bit.
Okay.
Is
ready.
Cringe or cool, right? This is the part where you decide whether this marketing technique is cringe or cool. LinkedIn sob stories.
Ooh. Okay. Honestly, for me, it's a bit cringe, I have to say. Like, I think there's a limit to it, though. It's not all cringe, and it's certainly not all cool. I think there's some happy medium where it's okay, but there is some of it that's like maybe completely unrelated to anything, and someone finds a way to like turn it into something about work. It just feels kind of like to me. But I know that people get a lot of engagement that way. I know, Konrad,
I'm probably guilty. I'm guilty of like, but I hope with mine, I try to turn it sometimes into something funny, or like there's a take to it. But is it anyway? I think LinkedIn. Let's not open that whole conversation. That's another conversation for another day.
Well, for sure. LinkedIn has gone in an interesting direction, which I guess kind of maybe could have been expected because it's social media at the end of the day. But yeah, wow, we could talk about that.
Very wavy, lots of weird trends that catch on and like saturate immediately, and then like and then it changes to something else.
So it's for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sort of in agreement. I think it can be done okay. So it's maybe, but overall more on the cringe side, especially when you see it all the time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shelby. This was amazing. What a good first episode. The rest of the podcast is going to be extremely successful thanks to you. Yeah, thanks to you alone. And to this, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was really interesting for me, again, as an external agency, to actually have a bit more insight into kind of the inner workings of a company that we work with, but just like a fast-moving scale-up that's doing so well with content marketing. So really, really intriguing stuff. And I hope there's been a lot of value for our listeners. And I hope you've enjoyed yourself, Shelby.
Totally. Thank you for having me. Honored to be number one. And, it's only up from here.
Number one. Thank you so much. I will drop your kind of LinkedIn profile link into the show notes.
Sure.
And I guess people can connect with you on LinkedIn. And if there's anything else, anywhere else you want us to send them, for example, to the HiBob blog, we'll definitely do that, and we'll drop that into the show notes too.
And check out our content. That's number one of importance to me.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.